Like, we are talking about non-reformist reforms. And so, yeah, Muel's example was great. Like, free broadband would make a difference. And yeah, so like, should we go into like trying to figure out what our definition is? Because there are a few different sets of criteria we could use.
Yeah, there is quite a few, right? Like I was looking at the notes here, and there's kind of like there's there's a few different perspectives, but yeah, let's go over it and then let's try and see if we can think of something that is like, you know, things that are unified between all of these different distinctions.
Yeah, and I'll say actually I'll just say it up front. That's going to be the homework this week, is we want chat to go away and have a think about what policies are. I'll say this again at the end. Don't worry, chat. If you're not going to miss it. But like, we want you to go away and have a think about what are non-reformist reforms, and therefore when it would be worth your while getting involved with electoralism.
Yeah.
So, Nicole, I put the Wikipedia for non-reformist reforms in Shadow Cabal. I know it's not the best source, but it does the trick pretty good. Yeah. So the first thing is, I took a little quote out of this, which was, non-reformist reform is a reform that is conceived not in terms of what is possible within the framework of a given system and administration, but in view of what should be made possible in terms of human needs and demands. And that's a pretty nice definition. I quite like that one. We're not thinking about what Biden is likely to do to amend the Keystone Access Pipeline regulation. We're going, no, people need their fucking land back, right? Like something that would be like a significant shift on that topic, because it's actually
like actual
outside.
Land reform.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, totally. So things that actually work towards revolutionary goals, as opposed to just like mitigating the harm from you know, the existing capitalism, or, you know, hegemony or whatever, hegemonic systems. Interesting. Because, I mean, I think there's like a lot of things that people would point to and be like, oh, well, you know, so, you know, like any kind of, actually, like a lot of people were concerned with, with this recent Chilean election with Boric getting in, because, the guy that he was running against, Cast, was like super conservative, and a lot of queer people were really worried that he was going to do something, because they only just legalized same-sex marriage in Chile, and it was huge protests. It was like clashes in the street with cops and stuff like that. And because Cast is kind of like this law and order tough guy conservative, they were like, that was a lot of his campaign was just using that as kind of like ammunition. So you know, like a lot of people were saying, like, if he gets in, like, we're probably going to have to leave the country because things are going to get a lot worse. So for things, you know, like voting for Boric, where it's like he's going to get in and he's probably going to make life easier for queer people in the most parts.
Yeah.
Like, would you say, because there's like, okay, so that's harm reduction, because you know, like, people aren't getting like literally harmed, but then also it's like, if you're not at risk of just being fucking, you know, like I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's like, the question is it the because the non-reformist reforms would refer to the policies. So I guess what would be the example of the policy Boric puts in this point?
Yeah.
Did Boric put in like legalizing same-sex marriage?
I think he came in just before he came in. But it was like, it was like a really big, like, it was like a campaign thing for both of them, where Boric is like, I'm the guy that's gonna, you know, make things safer for you, and Cast was like the one where he's like, actually, cops are, you know, cops have got something here, you know, like beating you up in the streets is good. So it's kind of like, I guess, you know, because what I'm trying to get at, like, I mean, like, I don't have a specific policy in mind, is like the idea of where something reduces harm to the point where it means that people can actually go out and agitate in the streets, and people can actually work towards revolutionary goals. But then it's kind of like, is that just too far removed, where it's like,
well, no, I feel like if we go on the definition we've already, so maybe this is a good point at which we start using different criteria, but the definition we already read out was, it's conceived not in terms of what's possible within the framework of a given system and administration, but in view of what should be made possible in terms of human needs and demands. And I'm like, so if we think of it as legalizing same-sex marriage, that's absolutely a non-reformist reform, because they didn't just go, can we do it? They said it has to happen, and they made it happen.
Absolutely.
And then So if you're like, if we're going to frame it in terms of that policy specifically, someone could be saying to their neighbor, like, I need you to vote for Boric because he will protect this, which is a serious change to like meet people's basic needs.
Okay, cool, interesting. Okay, well, so, should we have a look at some of these other definitions?
Absolutely. So, Nicole, if you go down to the heading "Criteria for Identification" in the Wikipedia article, there are a few different ones. There it is. And why don't Nicole? Why don't you read us the Dean Spade set of criteria? So basically, these are just different folks who have tried to define it.
So Dean Spade says, does it provide material relief? And I guess we can think about the example of same-sex marriage in this regard. Does it provide material relief? Does it leave out...
in some senses, yes, because married people often get support from the government for being married as opposed to not being married. So it being legally marriage rather than just a civil partnership, yes.
Does it leave out an especially marginalized part of the affected group? For example, people with the criminal records, people without immigration status. I'm assuming that this is the
assuming no, right?
Yeah. Does it legitimize or expand a system we are trying to dismantle? I think there's an argument potentially for that being the case.
Someone could argue that marriage is actually a bad system, right? So they could be like, well, no, we actually don't want there to be more marriage. We don't want people to get tax cuts because they're married. We don't want people to have these weird like ownership laws, which like these weird laws which stem from like men owning women. Like maybe, but you could argue maybe, and that's when we're like maybe.
Unfortunately, I think that any sort of electoral process, it's in some way, shape, or form legitimizes the system you're trying to dismantle. I think there's always a sticky point, which I think a lot of people emphasize to the point where it blinds them to any utility to electoralism.
Well, let's think about expand. Does it expand marriage as a system? Well, yeah. So this one, maybe we might use this example and say, oh, actually these criteria say maybe it's not a non-reformist reform.
I was thinking that expanding a system as in relying on the states to provide you your needs, and also legitimizing the state by saying it like rainbow avatar state, essentially. You know what I mean? Because you see that happening all the time. All the time in the Democratic Party in America. America loves to do this, loves to be like, we are the progressive party. See, look, we passed this thing. And then people go, see, no, you are now considered like the good party, and we are going to vote for you and vote blue no matter who, and all that stuff. So totally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Should we pick a different policy and try that through Dean Spade's criteria?
Sure. I mean, the policy that I think we're going to be discussing today, I don't know if we should like go into that right away, or we should stick with one.
I think it's okay to mention it. It's in the title, isn't it?
It is in the title, right?
Medicare for all, or single payer healthcare, right, for America.
And and this I eventually want to get to this Medium article, which is how I was introduced to this topic by my viewer Jameson, because one day I was harping on the uselessness of reforms, and he was like, "Wait a minute." So I learned a lot about this interesting existence of a non-reformist reform. But
fun.
I guess do you want to jump into Medicare for all? Let's okay.
Sure. So does it provide material relief?
Chat.
Yes.
One is yes.
Surely.
Whoops.
If you believe.
You meant Oz.
That's true. Yeah, everyone, we can get chat involved. That's a good point.
Get chat involved.
Chat. If you think that Medicare for all provides material relief, hit me with a 1. If not, 0. And it'll be 1 for yes, 0 for no on every question. Right.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yep, lots of 1s. I agree.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Does it leave out an especially marginalized part of the affected group? Now, the affected group here is everyone who could need healthcare. Does Medicare for all leave out a marginalized part of that group?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. 1 for yes, 0 for no.
Yeah, I can't think of any way where that... Yeah, right?
I mean, I don't recall the details on Medicare for all, because I know that every politician had their particular tweaks on it.
True,
but my understanding was it was defined as a non-mean tested program, meaning it should be universal and not required. You didn't have to be required to be like a citizen, right?
Yeah.
If I recall.
Oh,
well, so that's an interesting question, right? Because if people put their little tweaks on it, you could wind up with it becoming no longer a non-reformist reform if Mitch McConnell gets his hands on it and he's like, right, but only if you can show ID or something, right? Then we know it disproportionately affects people without ID, so it disproportionately affects people of color, right? All right. 1 for yes, 0 for no. Does it legitimize or expand a system we are trying to dismantle? Ooh.
That's a tricky one for this one.
Right. Well, I'm like, yeah, kind of.
Okay, so I can speak to this. So I think that on one hand, it legitimizes, like I said before, the state being the provider of rights, the state being the provider of these things. But I do think it serves to delegitimize and to reduce the system that we're actually trying to dismantle, and that system being like private health insurers or private health care.
Insurance industry in general.
And I know that the Medium article discusses this really well, and I think some other these other people also kind of touch on this, which is the idea that a non-reformist reform would serve to prove, of the many things it does, serve to prove as an example to those onlookers of what happens when you do socialize things. Because at least in America, we are taught that everything going private gets better. You privatize it, it gets better, it gets nicer, it gets prettier, it gets faster. So the idea that if you don't privatize, you socialize it, that it would actually be better is kind of proving that, hey, if we take things back to the collective, right, correct. So
Well, I think that we're getting stuck on this question, on this criterion specifically. I'll just read out the last one. Chat's 1 for yes, 0 for no, but then we'll go on to some other criteria possibly. And so the last criterion in Dean Spade's one is, does it mobilize the most affected for an ongoing struggle? Now, I think...
What does mobilize mean?
I'm trying to give some space so chat can start responding with their ones and zeros. But mobilize means that their time and money and energy isn't used up anymore. And I find this probably the most useful question for determining a non-reformist reform. Because, so if we think about, so I think yes, because I think that if everyone didn't have to pay huge medical bills, have to raise the money to pay huge medical bills, do loads of fucking GoFundMes, for all of the unnecessary nonsense around
the stress of it, the absolute
healthcare,
stress, of it, the mental health,
and just being able to access healthcare as well. All these things would absolutely mobilize people, I think. But let's try Peter Gelderloos. Muel, do you want to hit us with these criteria?
Yeah. Okay. So we'll just go through and ask chat again, yeah?
Yeah.
Does it seize space in which new social relations can be enacted?
Interesting question.
That's an interesting question.
That's very academic.
And if you're just joining us, when we say it, maybe we should say this in the question, we mean Medicare for all. We're using Medicare for all
in this
as an example.
Medicare for all. Yeah.
So not the only non-reformist reform available. Or
this is super interesting thing there, because like new social relations, I'm gonna say that's to do with like class divides, you know, racial divides, you know, obviously like sexuality divides, stuff like that, like, you know, so that's really interesting. Like in what way would Medicare for all seize space for those new relations to flourish? Like, it's kind of like, would we see more people? I don't know. It's a really tough one, right? It's a really tough one.
I think, I don't know. It's interesting because when you think about the grip that people... Oh, shit. Yeah, Jameson has just kind of said like an interesting, which is kind of like what I was just going to get at. 100% this M4A satisfies this criteria. Everyone is afraid of being fired and losing their employer-based private healthcare. Without that label would be less afraid to organize. That's kind of what I was thinking about, the grip of... that private healthcare has on you.
I always forget that not everyone is in our hell world here in America. That you're like,
it's a weird thing. Our Tory politicians who are currently in with a huge majority have been trying for years and years to get rid of the NHS, but they're really pushing it through right now. And I honestly think the big part of that is that they are afraid of organizing, and they've been looking at America, and they've literally noticed like all these people are tired all the time. They've got no money. They got they're stressed. They got debts, right? They can't fight back. So privatizing healthcare is a really effective way of distracting the working class with something. Because this is the thing, when we talk about distractions, it sounds like we're talking about things that are trivial. And obviously your health isn't trivial. Like, often distractions are just real things that you genuinely have to go take care of. In fact, that's the most effective kind of distraction, isn't it?
Yeah, so I reckon that's a great point from Jameson.
Yeah.
Should we
So yeah, it does
So the next one, does it spread awareness of its ideas, participatory, not passive? Now that addendum in the brackets is interesting. Participatory, not passive. So it's saying just by virtue of it existing doesn't count if it spreads awareness of its ideas, right? So it has to be participatory. Gang, what do we think?
So is that saying that it
I don't know what that means.
It's encouraging people to actively participate, like actively what is that? Does that mean that it's kind of like not something that just kind of
So in the case of Medicare for All, I would say that everyone would benefit. Not everyone would benefit from it because some people are already rich and they already have healthcare.
Yeah.
But it does spread awareness of the possibility. We were just saying this, right? It spreads awareness of the possibility of socializing everything.
Yes.
Because everyone will participate in Medicare for All if Medicare for All passes because they'll get free healthcare. Right.
Yeah. And then and I think like something like that would be huge in the States when people go like, okay, well we just we like nationalized all these healthcare providers or whatever like that. Like what else can we do? Like what else can we push for things?
This is an interesting note that I've just thought of, which I think we talk a lot about the official position of our show and how we're saying that we think that governments have made it impossible for people to just legally and civilly and peacefully protest. And so we're going to see more and more of people smashing shit up, obstructing systems, resisting systems, and destroying systems by just any means necessary. And to understand the other side of that, right? What we're talking about today is these are policies that they could put in if they wanted to not have people do those things, right?
Exactly.
And sometimes governments genuinely, when they are confronted by serious organizing, will respond by chucking out a few of these kinds of policies that they could have done any time. They just easily could have done them any time, but they just give you little victories or huge victories, to make you feel satisfied with it.
Slightly raise the minimum wage or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And then everyone's like, we did it. Woo, yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like the infinite accumulation of a capital is incredibly short-sighted. Who'd have thought? So the next one. Let's have a look here.
Can I quickly speak on what I think this is? So real quick.
Sure.
The way that I read this, and I think Peter could be a little more clear with these points, Peter.
I agree.
Yeah.
Me too.
But
he's a little crit from Red Planet here. Come on.
But the way I read this is, does the system as it exists something that you are actively having to engage in and therefore have to acknowledge its benefit, or is it something that is so in the background that you can forget about it? And one of the examples of this is, I'm speaking from my public health experience, that in public health we always talk about how good public health is not even seen. When your water is clean, when the air is clean, when streets are safe, when there's adequate lighting, no one's like lighting, air, water. You don't acknowledge it. So the good public health is invisible to you. And so I would imagine that it would be, if I'm reading this question, this is the way I'm reading it, it would be more on the passive side. And this is why I think that so many people, when we talk about socialized things, they immediately go, oh no, that would be horrible. And I'm like, do you not realize how much is already like that? They don't understand
Very interesting.
roads and things like that. It doesn't register them. So that's the way that I'm kind of reading that.
No, that's interesting. Yeah.
Very interesting because one of the biggest sort of criticisms you find of, I don't know, this comes from all areas of British society, but you do find a lot of British people saying we take our NHS for granted. Right, which is what you're saying. People take in our country the NHS for granted. It's in the background. It's we just assume it's always going to be there. So public health, clean water, stuff like that. So that's really interesting. Yeah,
and this is why I think that the right loves to talk about how bad the U.S. Postal Service is, when the same government underfunds it and tries everything they can to make it look as impotent as possible, essentially.
That's exactly what happens with
your
NHS.
socialization.
That's exactly what they're doing to the NHS right now.
Yeah, 1,000%.
So I don't like Peter's criteria very much. I'm just going to say it. I don't really like these very much. You want to carry on with the last two of them? Because, like the next one is another example of why I don't really like this one.
I don't like this either. Like, does it have elite support, right? So
we're talking about electoralism.
Already really,
So anything that's ever going to get passed has elite support.
Yeah.
And anything that's not going to get passed doesn't. So cool. A non-reformist reform is a policy which will never pass. Great. What
Great.
a cool
Thanks,
definition.
Peter. Great, Peter.
Like, also, and let's just like be super cynical for a second. Like, let's be a Elon Musk tech bro and imagine our workforce. Right, we're engaging in like neo-Fordianism, right? We're getting our workforce, and we're like, if we make them happy and healthy and blah 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 blah, they're a better workforce, right? So there are plenty of elites who I think reasonably could support M4A because they're like, well, then they'll be healthier workers and they'll get more done.
They take less sick days.
And this is the way that I divide. This is the way I describe to my child all the time the difference between like a reform and like a non-reformist reform. If you look at Medicare for all, the one policy, Medicare for all, let's pretend that that it's the exact same policy for both of these candidates. We have Elizabeth Warren, speaking of American politics right now, who is a self-described capitalist who has no intention. She gave Trump a standing ovation when he said that America will never be a socialist country. And she's saying, under my presidency, I will give you Medicare for all. Then you have Bernie Sanders, who, whether or not you think he's truly a socialist or not, describes himself as a socialist and is clearly not a person that is advocating on, at least as his position for capitalism. He is grassroots support. His approach to Medicare for all seems far more in line with a non-reformist reform. But so this is the same, essentially the same policy, but in like you were describing before, like sometimes it's sometimes these things can be used to help to reinforce, make healthier workers, so more production. And I feel like that's an Elizabeth Warren approach. And so I do think there are sinister ways of sneakily taking something that might appear to be a non-reformist reform and to be like sneakily guide it toward more of a thing that legitimizes and strengthens the status quo.
Yeah, and all of this is a good example of how non-reformist reforms could come into play in, for example, the Democratic primaries, but they can't really come into play in the general election. Like, it's very rare for a presidential candidate to change halfway through and be like, oh yeah, I do want Medicare for all. Right. Or something as serious as that. It would seriously affect their base and it could throw the election for them. So it's like, past a certain point, you're not going to change the policies. And this is why, and also, I think this is a bigger part of the episode we're doing today, is like, understanding in terms of policies, not in terms of personalities, is so fucking important. Because literally, like, if your like local town council guy was doing like a local, not town council, I guess like your state legislature, right, was gonna do a socialized medicine for your state, and that exists, I think, in Boston. No, what is it? Massachusetts. I think Massachusetts has some form of pretty like cheap or free healthcare, but like, and they were Republicans, right? You would want to not vote for them. But if you're already in a red state and it's going to be Republicans anyway, right, then you could engage with it as far as like, I do want the guy who's advocating for the thing that would be a non-reformist reform. Like, or again, if it was a Democrat and they were just a really shitty Democrat, like they're really fucking, who's the one? Kirsten Sinema, right? Like everyone's absolute least favorite politician, the epitome of cringe, right? But if they were like Medicare for all, right? You just gotta, like, this is why you have to care about policies and not about like personalities as much. But obviously, if someone is, you know, their personality is they're going to brutalize minorities, don't vote for that person. You know, obviously, I'm not saying like vote for the guy who's like, you know, a fascist. But I just wanted to offer like my take, because you know, maybe we'll carry on with this criteria, but like my take, and yeah, maybe we'll back and forth with this, but is that we live in a society with, broadly speaking, two classes, right? People who own the means of production and people who don't. And we want everyone to be equal and have an equal relationship to power. And that's a struggle that people are engaging in, a class struggle. And so my one criteria really would be, does this policy make people available to engage in class struggle. That's really my one thing. I would say that's my only criterion, is just like, does it let people not waste time with shit, or like waste their money or their effort or their lives on capitalist nonsense? Does it free them from that a little bit? And that's time they could be spending in the class struggle. You know, that's my kind of my one criteria, really. What do you guys think of that?
I think that's the most important criteria.
Harsha Walia's criteria here under here. Has the tactic been effective in exposing or confronting a specific point within the system by either diminishing its moral legitimacy or undermining its functions?
That's in Harsha Walia's criteria, you're saying?
Yeah, it's like, it's the only criteria that
right.
has. Which I think is really interesting, because it's like, it specifically speaks to not just undermining the functions of, you know, like the state that works against the working class or whatever, but diminishing its moral legitimacy, I think, is really interesting as well.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, I think this is like a really good point just in itself, you know. Like, there's some of the other headings have interesting ones as well, like under critical resistance they have like, you know, will we have to undo this later, and all this kind of stuff. But I think a lot of that kind of stuff, like, I'm not personally too concerned with when we talk about this stuff, but I think this one here, Harsha Walia, I think this is a really
Nicole,
really
could you scroll down on it and show everyone Harsha Walia's one?
Yeah,
it's just the next one.
Yeah, it's just the next one. Jamison 89 in chat says Massachusetts had Romney Care, which was what Obamacare was based on. Still has the private health exchange. The only way you could squint at Obamacare could be considered non-reformist reform is that it eliminated insurance companies denying care to people with pre-existing conditions, so everyone can get health care, but they still got to pay for it. So that's all really interesting. And you know who knows loads about Obamacare specifically is our guest this week, F.D Signifier.
That's right.
Here we go.
Hey!
How's it going?
Hi.
All right, here we go.
I'm just coming in hot. I'm coming in and dire need of this coffee.
Yeah, I'm all out.
Dire need of this coffee, y'all. Woo! All right.
FD, do you know about non-reformist reforms? We were just going over some definitions in the chat.
So I looked over the let's just keep going. I looked over the doc, which I'm reopening, cool. But I'm much better at hearing people talk about the thing.
Okay, cool. So I'll just concisely sum back up and then lead into the conversation, which you're really here for. So we have been looking over these criteria with Medicare for All as our example. So a non-reformist reform, according to the quote, is a reform that is conceived not in terms of what is possible within the framework of a given system and administration, but in view of what should be made possible in terms of human needs and demands. So Medicare for All, pretty clear to see how it would meet that definition, because we wouldn't just ask, can Biden do it? We'd be like, people need it, so it's happening. Right. Then there's a few different criteria definitions we looked over just now. So we got some different sets of criteria.
We didn't like these very much.
We kind of found issues with a lot of them.
Yeah.
But Harsha Walia had a pretty nice one, which was, has the tactic been effective in exposing or confronting a specific point within the system by either diminishing its moral legitimacy or undermining its functions? Which is a very wordy one, but it's a really nice one, I think.
Yeah,
so,
I think it sums up a lot of good stuff in there.
Right. Like, we were just saying how the American healthcare system essentially disables a lot of people by bogging them down with debt, by making their health shitty, and therefore paralyzes them, and they're not available for class struggle.
Even like tying them to their employers with, you know,
and tying them,
like that.
Huge interconnected thing. Yeah.
And I think Medicare for All definitely does expose that, right? It exposes.
Well, it doesn't just. I think I would say it on the second one. Really, it's it undermines its functions, right? Like, if everyone had healthcare, then they wouldn't be tied to their employers. They wouldn't be struggling with debts, all this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. I like that last one a lot. I remember when I was reading over the list of criteria, I wasn't so much iffy about them. I was just thinking, like, what's actionable? You know what I mean? Like, what can I take to people versus what will get likes on Twitter? It's one thing I think about a lot. Whenever we get into certain discourses and thinking about social action as opposed to education, which is still important.
Yeah.
And so that last one I love because I hate to say it kind of lowers the bar, but it makes
well, it focuses on the right things, doesn't it?
Yeah. It focuses on it's actionable because so I know one thing I think is useful about me. So I've done a lot of healthcare work in IRL. I've worked for a major major health research organization. My PhD program, my PhD coursework has been around a lot of health, sociology of health, and I've been in like meetings. I've been in the rooms with CDC people. I've written briefs that were supposed to be seen by the governor and had to go through the process of writing this already tame thing,
right?
And then sending it to a manager and being like, okay, not quite tame enough.
Oh my god, nice.
So fix that, and then we'll send it to the governor for him not to read it.
Okay. Okay, cool.
And so, and then the thing I lean on a lot, and I put it in the doc, is I'm older. I am new to identifying as a leftist, and thus being, I'll be 40 this year. I'm deeply invested in the status quo, just by the fact of where I am, my standpoint right now.
Sure.
I'm sitting in my house. I am paying for healthcare through my wife's job now because I left my job to YouTube. Right. I have kids coming downstairs now.
I really like this note that you put in here though. My desire to protect my family, though valid, should not supersede the intentions or needs of others for whom slow progress is unacceptable. Which I think is that's a very really good note. Awesome thing to even to acknowledge, because you get a lot of people that are really like you said yourself, you're invested in the status quo, and then you see these people that are like literally like struggling to live, and you get a lot of kind of like in other ways like well-meaning liberal people that are just like, oh, but like if we start having these conversations, that might put my own shit like then might be I might lose something personally, so
I joke with Anansi. I know you all had Anansi on the other day about like throwing bricks at tanks,
right?
And like being in the streets. So I've been in the streets, right? Like I, participated very briefly in Occupy Wall Street. I've been to multiple protests, before I had kids. And I have friends and peers who are still very much in that like space. Yeah. So like and because of that, I understand that there's a I was talking to Alki literally, I think maybe Friday night, kind of thinking about coming on here and how to effectively show up, or as a person who, again, is not, when I say invested, I want to be clear to anybody listening, it's not that I think this is right or the right thing to do.
It's material interest.
It's material. Yes, thank you. But like on the flip side, I have friends who have spilled blood in the last couple of years. You know what I'm saying? Not their own. Yeah. And
okay.
We have to internalize that when we talk about class struggle in the ideal sense. I was telling him, like, I don't like when people use the word revolution, because it obfuscates that we're talking about war. We're talking about violence at a material level if we're talking about immediate change. And so I am prepared for that if it comes, but I'm going to be honest in that that last bullet that still works, that's the best that works for me. But if somebody else hits the streets and is like, look, I started it without you. What you gonna do? I'm like, fuck, I guess we in there now. But
yeah, well, this is interesting, because I was gonna ask a question which I think you've already answered. Like, if it was going, you'd want to, you'd be like,
it's
okay,
actually ideal what you said.
Yeah. But
well,
I guess,
and that's like, Yeah, a lot of the time, there is that kind of thing where it's like I think starting a movement, starting a revolution, anything like that, it's like being the person that starts it, or the people that start it, is like the hardest part. Like once something is already going, like other people joining on is like, like that's like if you have a strong movement going, I think it's very natural for other people that maybe like like people that had other commitments or they were invested or whatever like that to change and to jump on board and stuff like that. I think there are a large percentage of people out there that probably naturally just without even thinking themselves of political people would align themselves with like any kind of like leftist uprising or revolution or anything like that.
Probably.
There's like plenty of people out there that like wouldn't consider themselves radicalized, but if they saw people out there in the street marching for like, Medicare for all, anything like that, they'd like, oh yeah, no shit, like that's good, we want to do that or whatever. And I think it's like part of the the thing as leftists, as communists, whatever you want to call yourself, whatever, is to be the people that to kick it off, sort of thing, and then appeal to the working class as this is why you should join us.
Well, I feel like seeing a bunch of that in Kazakhstan, right? Like, just like a mass uprising because the quality of life became unlivable, right? But like, I think that one thing that I think we've really tried to highlight on the show, I think, and Nancy does a great job of highlighting this in their work as well, is how much the violence that comes down is often against like. Not against people who are like forming a militia so they can overthrow the government. Like, I mean, we can see that plain as day, actually, because like all the fucking right wingers are forming militias to overthrow the government, and the police don't care, right? So like they don't actually care to like crush that, but they do care to use violence to crush like people who are giving water bottles to homeless people during a heat wave. And actually like 99 or 95% of what we would call a revolution, if we're just defining it by like the system's like this system, and then it's like that system afterwards. 95% of the effort and organizing involved is about taking care of people, and that's why we talk about dual power on the show. Right, chat. It's test time. It's time for the test.
Pop quiz.
Pop quiz. No. I'm surveying you. It's not a test. I genuinely want to know
so that
we can address the issue. Okay. Ones in chat, if you are confident you could identify a non-reformist reform policy, and zeros if you are not confident that you could identify one, because I think we should try and make some people go away from this and can actually do their homework, because the homework is going to be to go look at that stuff. Lots of ones.
Few zeros.
Few little zeros.
Okay.
I think it might be worth us going over it again.
Let's go over it again. Yeah.
Right. Because we did derail for a long time also.
we did, yeah. Which is fair enough, right? So the definition that we all agreed was the best one was, is it Haria? I forgot her name. Walia?
Hasha Walia?
Yeah, right. And that person said, is it there? Do we have it? Oh my God. There we go. Has the tactic been effective in exposing or confronting a specific point within the system by either diminishing its moral legitimacy or undermining its functions?
Yes.
And I think, and that's great because like Medicare for All does that, right?
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like the system is, we don't want you to have healthcare. We want you to suffer. We want you to pay unbearable amounts of money for it. And it completely undermines that system. It's done. So like another example that I brought up at the start of the stream that people might have missed was free broadband that Jeremy Corbyn brought in as a policy.
Or to go something way more basic about human needs, Corbyn and kind of people he's working with have been for a long time suggesting a national food service.
Yes.
So similar to the National Health Service, just anyone who's hungry, anyone get some food.
Yeah, that's a really cool one. Yeah,
really.
But that's basic. That's basically it.
Basically.
Well,
yeah.
We never got to the article that I wanted us all to get to, but
do you want to read it?
I don't think we have time because we're already over time and everything. But I linked it in the chat like throughout the stream for anyone else to read, because this is the thing that got me introduced to the topic. And what they defined as reformist reform is oh God, where is the definition that they used? Basically, it was
Reformism is when your mission is to tinker with the system to make people's lives better, but not really alter the basic structure at the end of the day. And reformists prefer changes that give people a much-needed helping hand, but don't really undermine capitalism. But there are other kinds of reforms that actually shift the balance of power in a dramatic way, even if they don't by themselves demolish all of capitalism. Is that the bit?
Perhaps, yeah. Oh yeah,
that's
so
pretty based.
Yeah, so like there's this whole article is great. It has like a lot of incredible gems in it. And I think it explains the concept from a multitude of different angles. Oh, here's a sentence. There are reforms that position us better to square off with capitalism.
Perfect.
I like this too, because I mean, I think there's like a lot of different ways to describe non-reformist reforms, and here's the thing: there's a lot of benefits to them. So they're not. It's not going to be just one way that they help you square off better with capitalism. But one of the ways they do that is by exposing or confronting a specific point within the system. Blah blah blah. So like, I think there's a lot of different ways you can talk about it. And I think that it's. I think the exercise of just trying to think in this way is just that being the homework, I think, is really the goal. It's not like, did you correctly identify one? Great. Well, you're done. Like, I think it's more of, can your brain start working in this way? You know, can we start to can we, instead of like thinking increase minimum wage, and then we just we're trapped in this idea that we're always stuck here just begging. In fact, can we start to interact with this system in a way that helps to dismantle it? I think that's a good exercise.
Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, you're fine. You're good.
I've already forgotten what I wanted to say. Oh, right. So we basically in this chat in this stream, we want to liberate our comrades. We want to liberate ourselves. We want to liberate our comrades, right?
Yeah.
So best way to look at this, I guess, is like, what's the best way that you can either liberate or potentially enable more people to help liberate our comrades through electoral policy.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
I want to read this also real quick. Jameson linked this to me earlier. I've talked about this a million times in my stream. It's this tweet I keep going back to. This is an excerpt from like a newspaper from a very long time ago in America. Unfortunately, not long enough, but a very long time ago, talking about how liberals were trying to reform slavery. So at the time when chattel slavery was active in America, there was like a group that was like, no, we love it. And then there was another group that goes like, okay, well, we can't just get rid of it. It's heartbreaking and it's, it makes you sad, but we can't just get rid of it. And so they try to reform it away. So I'm going to quickly read this because I think it really shows like the opposite of what we're talking about, of like that kind of like Libby reform, whatever we want to call it. So the Times list of slavery reforms included legalization of marriage, criminalization of the separation of husband and wife, Sunday instruction subject to efficient police regulation, ownership of property, and encouragement of savings. Slaves should be allowed to purchase their freedom if condoned by their state of residence. If a state did not want an emancipated slave to remain on its soil, the state could require that freedom be conditional on emigration to Liberia. The federal government could encourage these practices by offering to pay $25 per slave to each slaveholding state for an education and reform fund. The Times would allow slaves to be bought and sold as long as families remained intact, but slaves would still be subject to compulsory labor. The Times concluded, slavery thus modified and ameliorated will become a very tolerable system and would deserve the title of patriarchal, which his friends claim for it.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
A very tolerable system.
Yeah, very tolerable. This to me reads as the not reforms that positions people being enslaved as any closer to like gaining power or like, how do we use the descriptors we were using earlier? No, not this.
Well,
not that either.
Yeah, like I love to say free people, right? And it's just like if you're in the class struggle, right? And there's all sorts of shit that's stopping you and your comrades from fighting in it. And I don't mean brick at a cop car. Obviously, we don't endorse illegal activity here on Red Planet, but fighting in it by freeing other people from it.
Yeah.
Right?
And just like your ability to engage with I would say to engage with class war meaningfully, like, you know, to like even just having the time or resources to go to, you know, like to start organizing with other people and things like that. Doesn't necessarily need to be like your physical ability to go to a protest or something like that, but the accessibility to spaces where you can organize and things like that.
Yes.
And also, does it, like the reforms we just saw, were they helping to expose were they keeping you tied to the state, begging for rights, and like making the state a necessity to always have to exist, and you always have to like worship it? Or is this now instead a vehicle by which you can like kind of utilize to your advantage to help further dismantle it? That's kind of the weird way that I look at it, at least.
Also, I really liked what you read out about like the proposed reforms to slavery, because it reminds me of that tweet that like Kamala Harris got a lot of dunking on during the primaries.
It's
right?
So gross.
And I just wanted to compare, right? Like in terms of the levels of like caveats and abstractions and nonsense, right? Her tweet was, yesterday I announced that as president, I'll establish a student loan debt forgiveness program for Pell Grant recipients who start a business that operates for 3 years in disadvantaged communities. And it's like, this is your brain on liberalism. Like, this is the shit that you need to put together to be like, that would be a meaningful reform that would help people. And it's like, no, it wouldn't. No, it fucking wouldn't. Like, how many people would get to unplug from capitalism because of that, right? And in the same way, right, if we compare it to the slavery policy you just read out, it's like, how many people would get to just not be slaves anymore because of that policy, right? Compared to if you just go, slavery is legal. Like, it's just not legal anymore. Can't be having slavery. No more of it, please. Right?
Yeah.
And yeah, like, speaking of non-reformist reforms, one of those criteria we read up before that maybe is worth bringing into play actually is like, does it exclude a particular marginalized part of the affected group? And the outlawing of slavery in the US still isn't perfect, right? It actually says, except for if the slavery is as punishment for a crime. So essentially, prisoners are allowed to be slaves in the law of the US, right? Legally. And I would say prisoners are a pretty marginalized group of the, affected possible group. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
If all the people are an affected group, because anyone could be a slave, but then we're realistic about it. It's black people, because that's actually who are experiencing chattel slavery, right? People who commit crimes or are deemed to commit crimes for any reason are a pretty obvious marginalized part of that group. In fact, it could be as many as all of, again, people who are deemed to commit crimes or found guilty of a crime. It could be as many as just all of them. Like, we all know the American prison system is still full of black people, and that's because they didn't really let slavery go away, See how a reformist reform just lets slavery just carry on existing? Like, I just want to go a step further, right? We read out, Nicole, you just read out a proposed reform for slavery, but the truth is they did just reform slavery. They did just do it. They didn't actually have a non-reformist reform. They didn't actually abolish it. They just said no more slavery except this thing. And so that became where they did all their slavery through.
Yeah. Like, I mean, the prison, and like, you can see this, like, even, like up until, fairly recent. I think there's still a lot of it going on, like, outside of like prison labor, but there's all that weird shit where it's like they have like prisoners working in governors' mansions and shit like that. It's like that whole thing. And I think in Hillary Clinton's kind of memoirs and stuff, where she talks about literally like the slaves that they had from the local prison and shit like that. It's like, it's still very much a thing that exists.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, it's performed.
The biggest prison in the U.S. is Louisiana State Penitentiary, which is called Angola because the majority of slaves on the slave plantation that the Louisiana State Penitentiary is built on, right, came from Angola, and the population there is almost entirely life sentences and almost entirely black. It's just so this place physically was a slave plantation, and it still has the same nickname it had from when it was a slave plantation. And you've got a ton of black people there who have to spend the rest of their life there and have to work for no money and can't leave. Doesn't sound like slavery ended, does it? Right?
Right.
Like,
exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, chat, how are we feeling now? More confident? Can we tell a non-reformist reform from
I
a
saw someone literally
reform?
say that they went from 0 to 1, so that's great.
Sick. All right.
But someone in the chat did say earlier, so there's no such thing as a perfectly non-reformist reform, and I think like, yeah, right, I get where you're coming from,
Kinda,
right?
but like,
but that's we obviously know that it's not gonna like end capitalism voting for people. Like I think that's what you mean, right? We know that. We're not saying that non-reformist reforms are just ways that we can help other people get involved in movements by having their life not suck as much, right?
Exactly, yeah. Like, you know, ultimately we already said this, right? But like, whatever your dream policy is that you're like, fuck yes, you're super hyped about, by the time it gets passed, they'll do some sneaky rat fuck shit to it. They will.
Yeah.
They absolutely will. They absolutely will. I mean, fucking look at
like
this.
add in provisions and everything like that.
The proposed abolition of slavery was just like the law as it was written when it was proposed was like slavery is illegal. Like it was just that, right? And now it's like slavery is illegal, comma, right? And it's they will change it to be worse. They will change it to be worse, but it's still worth fighting for it to be as good as it can be.
Yeah.
But again, only up to a certain amount of your effort, at which point your effort could be better spent helping people directly, which I think is the point I've been trying to get across here today.
Yeah, we saw some good 0s to 1s. That was great.
That's great. I saw him.
Nice.
For sure.
Okay, well, I think do we have, everyone has their homework. Should we see if people did homework from last week? Because
that's what I was going to say. Speaking of 0s and 1s in chat if you did the homework last week, and 0s in chat if you didn't. But it's okay if you didn't and you weren't here last week. That's fine. Last week's homework was to get a first aid kit and learn how to use it. I did the homework.
Yeah, look at this.
I did it.
Look at this.
Who else did it?
I already had one in the hall, but I actually do, because it's a thing that I have to do every couple of years for work anyway, is to have like a first aid certificate, and I actually have to do like a little course thing. And so mine was up for renew, so I did that. And
nice.
Yeah,
that rocks.
Yeah, it's just a thing like to work in a tattoo shop and stuff. You have to know, for obvious reasons. Like,
Yeah.
This
is an interesting one because it's like one that required spending money, and like people, a lot of people have still done it. So again, it's not compulsory. Like you do it if you want to do it. It's not a big deal if you,
Yeah, and people in the chat who are saying things like, "Oh, I missed it last week. I missed it," etc., etc. Like I said last week, there's always going to be reasons that people can't do stuff. Do not worry. It's not like, you're obviously not going to get in trouble. You're not going to get banned. Or anything for like having not done the homework. We give you these things to do, not just to make you do them. Ideally, we want you to do them as soon as possible, right? That's the homework. But just the fact that you're aware of it now. And or you're at least thinking of like, how could I do this? Or why is this important, right?
Which is exactly what it is this week. Like Nicole already said, where it's about changing how you see this stuff, right? And so I would compare this to the homework we had 2 weeks ago, right? To go around your community and imagine how things would be different in your personal ideal world, like how things would work differently, right? It's about a new way of seeing things, right? I would love if people carry on doing that. I certainly have carried on doing that after I suggested that homework. I've carried on going around and looking at things and being like, yeah, that's how that could work. It'd be kind of interesting, like, and this is how blah, 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 right? Same thing this week. We want you to go out and look up what your electoral politics situation is, right? What possibilities for policies there are, and try and identify some non-reformist reforms. Unfortunately, there won't be many. That's kind of the whole game. That's kind of the whole entire deal. But do try, have a look.
Nice.
Cool. Well,
cool.
Great show, chat. Great episode 5. Can we get some bun claps or bun clap Fs in the chat? Bun clap F if you're not a subscriber. That's a follower emote. For us, the hosts. Wow, incredible. Incredible.
I'm so excited for us
to
get to talk about prison abolition. I hope Emmy gets a good mic soon so she can come on, because that's
gonna that'll be really good.
That's
so hard.
Great, yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Well,
what do we? Sorry.
No problem. I was gonna say, like, maybe I know the mods have like all the shout out information for the hosts, but do we? I feel like if every time everyone just quickly shouts out their stuff, that's probably a good plan, right?
I'm Sophie. I'm Sophie from Mars. You can find me on all platforms as Sophie from Mars. I do YouTube videos. I do a bunch of political stuff. I'll release a video soon on YouTube, Sophie from Mars, about all the political stuff I'm doing, including a thing I mentioned earlier today called Cyberpunk 2022, a direction for the online left. I feel like people should be getting hyped about that. So get hyped about that. And also go to patreon.com/Sophie from Mars to help me pay for rent and bills and little dresses and drugs. Okay, I'm done.
Great. I'm DJ Muel. I'm DJ Muel on Twitch. I'm DJ Muel _ on Twitter. I just do kind of like React Andy, like, you know, the content that we were talking about earlier that's like not that good. It's not that good for
That's
for
not
anyone.
what you're saying.
No, I'm okay, but whatever. That's what I do on Twitch. I do that Monday to Thursday, and I'm also doing I'm working on a YouTube video at the moment about how debate bros suck. Right, so that's on my YouTube.
Do?
Yeah, well, it's controversial.
Everyone,
I know it's controversial, but like, there's a lot of bad stuff that goes on, and I'm working on a video about that. Like, the rough draft is done. I just got to send it to like Sophie and Tim and Bunny and various other people all across YouTube and be like, "Is this right?" So yeah, look forward to that. That's on my YouTube, but that's going to be DJ MU3L on YouTube. So yeah. What about Tim though?
All right. Well, I'm Conquest of Dread on Twitch and on YouTube. On Twitch, I mainly just like play games and talk shit. We get a little political, but it's mainly just like, just games and talking shit. And it's when I stream is usually pretty late for a lot of people in America, or very early for people in the UK. And then on YouTube, I've got a bunch of video essays and things like that. And then I'm Dread Conquest over on Twitter. And there I don't know, just shitpost. Which brings us back to our delightful host, Bad Bunny. Everyone knows who she is. So.
Yeah, you can follow me here at the place that you all are. Remember, chat, I will be rebranding soon. The only thing that's stopping me from rebranding is finding an available name. It's very much more challenging at this point. I feel like
Nicole
it's because bots are just like botting away everything.
So then we're all just on the same red planet wavelength. You know, we'll just change everyone to From Mars.
From Mars.
yeah. So, but just stay tuned for that. And you can follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/badbunnytwitch. And also join our Discord. We always watch stuff after every stream. We always watch a show or movie or hang out and play games together or whatever. So feel free to join, and everyone's welcome. And
stay tuned because I'll be on tomorrow. I'll be on Nicole's stream tomorrow.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we're going to have a really great conversation about two very important topics. So yes, it'll be great. Cool. So tune in tomorrow, chat at 10 a.m. Pacific. It'll be Sophie and I streaming, and it'll be great. Maybe also work out, but we'll see. We'll see if we get to it. Hopefully.
Good night, everyone.
All right.
Good night, y'all.
shadows to remain invisible, and as you will soon find out, You cannot defeat an enemy that you cannot see.